zijn in de achtertuin van Anne Applebaum, journalist, historicus en auteur van dit boek, pas uitgekomen, Autocratie BV. Haar boek gaat over presidenten als Poetin, Xi, de Ayatollahs in Iran en ook over Donald Trump. Ik praat met haar over haar laatste boek en over de bedreigingen waarmee democratieën te maken hebben. Anne Applebaum, thank you so much for having us in your garden.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. First of all, Autocracy Inc., as it's called, the English title. What made you write this book? Why was it necessary to tackle this topic?
So the book describes a network of dictatorships. It's not an alliance, it's not an axis. It's a group of countries who work together opportunistically. Russia, communist China, theocratic Iran, Venezuela, Belarus, and a handful of others, who increasingly see us, the liberal world, as their primary enemy. I became aware of how the network operates via my friends who live in the autocratic world, who saw it and who began to describe it. If you live in Venezuela, you see it. You see Russian investment into the military in Venezuela. You see Chinese sales of surveillance equipment. You see Iranians on the other side of the world helping the Venezuelans dodge oil sanctions. And so you're very aware that there is a network that's keeping your regime in power. And it was really through them that I came to understand it.
What do they have to gain, the presidents, President Maduro of Venezuela, President Putin, President Xi of China? Why this corporation, this Inc.?
Well, to stay in power. They're interested in power. And I think this makes one thing that makes them a little different from the dictators of the previous century. They're also very interested in money. So we're talking about people who are billionaires. So they have, the money brings them influence, and then that again helps them to maintain power.
But these alliances that you describe are very strange because ideologically there is no connection. Because you write that also the mullahs in Tehran, in Iran, are in this game.
They don't have any ideology in common, but they do have a way of ruling. So these are all regimes or rulers who rule without any checks and balances, without an opposition, without independent courts, without independent press or media. And all of them want to keep it that way. They don't want to have any opposition, any challenge, any transparency. And they've come to understand that in order to stay in power, they need to push those rules not only at home, but around the world. So they increasingly look to undermine the ideas and ideals of democracy because they need to defeat them at home, and they need to convince their own people that there's no alternative to the regime that they have.
But they hate transparency. They hate freedom of press, freedom of law.
Yes.
Everything that the West stands for, they abolish.
To the extent that they can, yes. And remember, because these are very often their home opposition, their domestic opponents, use that kind of language. They use the language of rights, of justice, of transparency. The Navalny movement in Russia was an anti-corruption campaign. The women's movement in Iran was a human rights campaign. And so that language is the language they want to push back against.
Are you surprised by the liberties that they take? For example, President Putin, when he decided that it was enough with Alexei Navalny and he could die in prison, as his wife had said, it's President Putin who ordered this. There is protest in the West, but that's about it.
No, they don't care. So one of the things that's also new is their sense of impunity, that they can do whatever they want and they don't have to listen to any other opinion. They don't care anymore what's said about them at the UN or in the international media. And this also is different from the past. Actually, the Soviet Union did care how it was perceived. It wanted to be perceived as a just state. I mean, obviously it wasn't, but they had an enormous propaganda campaigns designed to convince people that their system was better and more fair. The current leaders of Russia or of China or of Iran don't care whether we think their systems are more fair. And in the case of Russia, they don't even pretend that that's the case.
So we should talk about ourselves. Should we not? I mean, are we the enablers of the system?
We certainly helped create it. We helped create it because for a long time we believed that economic trade with the autocratic world, especially Russia and China, but also others, had no political or strategic consequences, that there was such a thing as business deals, and those were completely separate from politics or from geopolitics or from strategy.
Now, we're talking on Friday, the 1st of November. We're just a couple of days away from the presidential elections in the United States. Here in the capital of the country, what will be the effect, actually, of the outcome of the presidential elections on the system that you describe in your book?
It's very hard to say. The only thing I think I can say for certain is that Donald Trump does not see himself as the leader of a broad Democratic coalition. He is not interested in allies. He never was. During his term as president, he was pushed by the generals and Republican leaders around him to maintain relationships with allies, but he always found it uncomfortable, wasn't interested. And so I don't see him leading a broad Democratic coalition into the future. Trump is very hard to predict because he's primarily interested in himself. He doesn't have an ideology. He's interested in whatever will keep him in power and make him rich or his family rich.
What kind of government do you see that he would maybe establish if being elected president of the United States?
So Trump does use very brutal, very autocratic language, some of which is directly imported from the 1930s, and it can't be by accident. I mean, there's no American tradition of talking about your political opponents as vermin, or talking about immigrants as poisoning the blood of the nation. Nobody has used that language before, and I looked, I checked, and that's a sign that he is preparing his electorate and he's preparing people around him to behave in a way that could defy the law or could push norms in a much farther than before. I mean, my guess about him, based both on, he's deteriorated quite a lot mentally, but he is surrounded by very different people now. And above all, I would expect a second Trump presidency to be profoundly corrupt. Just profoundly corrupt. That
what are the
pieces of the government will be sold off to the highest bidder. Lobbyists and industry representatives will be given access to whatever their relevant government departments are, whether it's Department of Energy or agriculture. There was some of that, I should say, in his first term, and I think it'll be much worse this time.
Is Donald Trump somebody who fits in your definition of an autocrat?
I mean, he doesn't have that kind of control. I mean, I would put him in the world of illiberal leaders. I mean, he's somebody who would like to be an autocrat. I don't know that he will be able to be one. Our system won't allow. It's not going to be. We're not talking about him becoming a Nazi as soon as he walks into office. I mean, there's a mistaken image. But will he be surrounded by people who want to bend the rules, who want to take over institutions, who want to defy the Constitution, who want to abuse the military? Yes, he will. And so in that sense, he will push the country in that direction. Yeah. Trump is, partly because of his distrust and dislike of alliances, partly because he quite admires and likes many elements of the autocratic world, partly because he shares Putin and Xi's scorn for the rule of law, he might well find himself allied against Europe, with Russia. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's not impossible, and it's something that I hope Europeans are fully prepared for.
What do you think for the future of this country? Because never in the 7 elections that I covered in this country, the situation has been so aggressive, the rhetoric so harsh, and the terms fascists and Hitler and Nazis are flying all over the place. Is it dangerous for this country?
Yeah, it's very dangerous. There was one comment made within the last few hours of our conversation. Trump, during a conversation, effectively threatened Liz Cheney. This is the Republican congresswoman who has backed Kamala Harris. And he talked about her being lined up essentially in front of a firing squad. And that was a direct encouragement to somebody to kill her. I mean, he's now using the language designed to inspire public violence. And no, we've never had a political candidate who did that before. We've had a lot of bad elections. We've had some pretty bad presidents. We've had, lots of people if you go back into U.S. history, you can find some unpleasant stories. But this is a much different level of violent rhetoric.
So there are those who say if Trump loses the elections on the 5th of November, then that could lead to a very aggressive outcome. And maybe we would see the images that we saw on January 6th.
So it won't be exactly the same, though. It won't unfold in exactly the same way. But there is clearly a plan. The Republicans have been preparing their electorate with false conspiracy theories about illegal immigrants stealing the election, which is, it's not happening. It's been proven many, many times. If you're not a citizen in the United States, you can't vote. And there's no evidence that non-citizens vote. There's no, I mean, you can find there's surveys that look at tens of millions of votes over many years, and they can find maybe 10 examples, maybe 20 examples of that. So it's an infinitesimally small number of people. Nevertheless, they're feeding their electorate and their supporters with this idea. And the only reason they would be doing that is that they're afraid of losing, and that's their plan, is to create some kind of hysteria.
If you look at the campaign of the Democrats and everything that we have seen happening in the summer with President Biden, who didn't want to give up his second term and wanted to run. And if you see his remarks the last couple of days, talking about the people who follow Trump as garbage, what is going wrong in that campaign?
So Biden's comment is completely irrelevant. And I'm amazed you asked me about it. It's like the least important thing that's happened in the last 3 months.
It's being published.
Yeah, by the Republican.
In the echo chamber.
Yeah, but it's not being. It has no bearing on reality. It's a, you know, Biden using the word garbage in the context of a comedian who called Puerto Rico garbage is not a story. It's a fake story.
Well, it's on the front pages of major newspapers.
It is a completely fake story. You know, the real story is Trump's rhetoric. Trump's calling for violence against his enemies. These are the real stories.
I'm asking you because we have talked a lot about Trump, but was a mistake of the campaign of the Democrats that a president who is maybe too old to lead and not capable of going into a debate with Donald Trump has been too long in his position, and the people surrounding him did allow it, basically, that he could go on?
Yes, it was a terrible mistake. There's no question. I mean, there are different versions of Biden was functioning well some of the time, less well other times. Old people have good days and bad days. I mean, actually, young people sometimes have good days and bad days. I think that his performance in the debate was actually a shock to people around him. They didn't think he would do that badly.
The autocrats that you describe in your book, who do they want to win this election, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, Putin clearly wants Donald Trump because he's put, the amount of, the Russian trolling operation and the amount of Russian money that's gone into supporting influencers, I mean, some of which was recently revealed by the FBI, it's gone into pushing the far right in the United States makes it clear. They want Trump because they think they'll win the war that way. I mean, for them, they're not winning the war in Ukraine. They're losing thousands of people. It's been more than 2.5 years. The war is an embarrassment. Putin himself has become paranoid. Last week, he's begun destroying his own palaces because he's afraid that the Ukrainians will hit them with drones. So, of course, he wants to win the war. It's much easier to win the war by electing Donald Trump than it is to win the war on the ground. So that's clearly his interest.
You write in your book, if Trump ever manages to use federal courts and law enforcement against his enemies, the blending of autocratic and democratic worlds will be complete.
Yes. So we already have here, as I'm sure you have in the Netherlands, we have cases of online mobs going after people. And that's what happens now online because we haven't regulated social media. What we don't have yet is people with government power working together with those mobs or directing the mobs and combining the mobs with legal harassment or other tactics, which you would have for example, in Venezuela, or even in some decaying democracies like Mexico. So we haven't had that yet in the United States, but it's very, very possible that that's what you could see in a Trump administration, is him going after people both by having his online followers chase somebody, but also with the institutions of the state, as I said, maybe the Department of Justice, maybe the IRS, maybe others.
Yeah. You end your book with solutions to the problem of autocrats and them working together. What are they? Where do you see light in the tunnel?
The solutions are coalitions that are focused on solving the problems. I don't think that the United Nations, or even that model of international institutions where there's like a big building in New York or Geneva and with lots of bureaucrats, I don't think this is how international problems are going to be solved anymore. They're going to look rather more like, for example, the coalition that Biden created to fight in Ukraine, which has 50 countries in it, or the coalition to provide vaccines to the world, which had a huge range of countries plus some private philanthropists. There needs to be a coalition to fight kleptocracy, to destroy this shadow world of business, which does so much to encourage and keep autocrats in power. There needs to be a coalition to regulate the internet, to make platforms legally responsible for what appears on their sites. To change even the advertising calculus that makes it so financially lucrative for people to print extremist and outrageous language online, that people are making money that way. All those things could be done. It would be better to have the United States leading these coalitions because it's the largest country and the largest democracy. If the United States doesn't lead them, then it will be up to Europe.
Do you see any leader in Europe who could do this, who has the power to build a coalition?
One will have to emerge.
Do you see any now, today?
Let's talk in a few months.
Isn't the honest answer no? There is nobody who could do it?
There are people, but let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah. The first line in your book is, or you address your book, I don't know how you would like to describe it. It says, "Voor de optimisten" in Dutch, for the optimists.
Yes.
How come?
Because the optimists are the people who make things happen. Because the people who I know who are fighting for their rights and fighting for the rule of law and fighting for freedom in places like Russia or Belarus or Venezuela, those people are all optimistic. And they're the ones who will create change. And we who live in the most prosperous, the most free societies on earth, maybe ever, we don't have the right to be pessimistic, given how hard, what hard work people in much less free, much less wealthy societies are capable of. So it's up to us.
It's up to us, but at the same time, you write about these examples of people who have been very courageous, like Alexei Navalny or Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the opposition leader of Belarus, who can go back to her country and her husband is in jail.
She's still fighting.
She's still fighting.
That's what she does.
It is such a difficult fight and almost impossible.
You think she should give up?
No, I totally respect her. I interviewed her and
Yeah.
I think she is unbelievable in what she does. But it's, as you write in your book, it's so difficult for these people to win.
Well, maybe we should be helping them win.
And we don't.
Well, maybe we should. That's why I wrote the book.
Yeah. Is that your personal quest?
Of course.
Wake up?
Wake up. Sure.
Because we are at sleep?
I think people are complacent. Do you
ever get tired of warning?
I didn't have the right to be tired.
Are you an optimist?
I'm an optimist. Yeah. I mean, what else would I be?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.